Good afternoon. You're a quiet audience. We'll see if we can. Yeah, there we go. There we go. Well, as introduced, I'm Scott Robohn. I'm a co-founder of the Network Automation Forum, a group that was founded last year to promote adoption of network automation. I'll tell you a little bit about my background, what we're doing with NAF, some of the things that we're seeing in terms of automation trends or lack of, and be interesting to hear your feedback and interaction on this as we go. But I will follow the instructions and we'll take questions afterward. Very good. And we want to use the mics for questions, right? Because we're capturing this. Very good. First, thank you for having me and happy birthday to CodiLime. I saw this the other day. 13 years. That's not unlucky at all. But now you're in your 14th year, so it's all good. But yeah, I'm very, very happy to be here. I appreciate you inviting me. I will give you a little bit of my background, talk about the NAF story, how we were founded and what we're doing. We'll go through what we see as fundamental tech for automation, talk about where we think automation can go or maybe should go, and some futures for NAF. So sorry for the large picture and the small font. That's me. I won't make you read that all. I have over 30 years as an internet plumber. I don't know if that translates well into Polish, but I've been very, very lucky to get in on internet infrastructure when I came out of university in 1991. Explains the gray hair. I didn't study, I have an undergraduate degree in industrial engineering and a master's degree in something called operations research, which is really kind of applied math and optimization. There was no network engineering field of study when I was in school, and I've just stumbled into this and came into the industry at a time where if you could learn and you could do, you could get jobs in network engineering, and that's how I came up in the industry. So who's heard of NAF before tonight? Okay. No, the CodiLime people don't count. That's great. How did you hear about NAF? I'm not supposed to ask questions. So, from CodiLime. Thank you. That's the right answer. Excellent. And CodiLime has been a great sponsor of NAF as well. We couldn't do the events that we do without the support of companies like CodiLime. So here's the short version of how we were formed. Back in late 2022, I was getting ready to form my own consulting business. Wasn't thinking specifically about network automation at all. But I came across a gentleman named Chris Grundeman, and Chris is my partner in NAF. He and I are the co-founders of the organization. And I saw that Chris was doing a state of network automation survey. And I thought, that sounds really interesting. I would love to see the results of that survey. No, scratch that. I would like to talk to Chris. So through professional contacts, we connected and just started talking about what we're seeing in terms of adoption of network automation. And we've kind of asked ourselves the question, what's the holdup? Why is this going so slowly in terms of production networks making large-scale use of automation? And neither of us had good answers, but we decided, well, let's get people talking and figure out what are the reasons, what's the friction, what's the holdup. And in about 5 months, we pulled together our first event, AutoCon 0, or AC0 in shorthand there, in Denver, Colorado, in the US last year. Our target was to have 200 people. We said if we got 200 people, we'll call that successful. We got over 340. So we're very pleasantly surprised. We're not a vendor-driven conference, so we're very vendor-inclusive. Like, I want the Nokias involved, the Junipers involved, the Aristas involved, and the automation companies as well, Itential and others. But our goal is to get people who are doing work in their network environments and for them to bring the stories of what they're doing from a network automation perspective. And all the presentations from November conference are on YouTube. I just should have put a link to those in the slides here. I'm sorry I didn't do that, but if you search on Network Automation Forum in YouTube, you'll find all the content from last year and all the content from our conference just last week will be posted there as well. Give us about a month. People are asking for all of it right away, which is great. So we believe that we had a very successful first event. There were a very vocal group of participants who said, please bring this to Europe. And we didn't have to think very hard about it. About 2 minutes, and then we said yes. So the question was where, and just to make it easy, Amsterdam was a very easy choice for us. Very well set up for travel, both, from North America and within Europe. We knew it would be a little more expensive, but we were ready for that. And we had the same planning process with more content and more participants. We had 400 people at the event in Amsterdam last week. And I feel like it went very, very well. We have yet to send out our post-conference evaluation form. We actually have somebody working on that right now to get official feedback from folks. There's a lot that goes into planning these conferences, and this isn't a talk about conference planning, but it's much more than you think, especially in the area of finding good technical content on network automation. So for example, for AutoCon 1 last week, we had 18 or 19 presentation slots and had over 70 talks submitted. So it's a very good problem to have, but you have to say no to a lot of people. Doesn't mean the presentation's bad. It just means we didn't fit the theme we were trying to pull together for this event. So keep that in mind if you ever submit for a conference. Just because you get rejected doesn't mean your content is bad. So, of course, that wasn't a problem with CodiLime and Palo Alto for last week. Was really happy to see that presentation, and I'll tell you more why in a bit. So as they say, there's no rest for the wicked. We are already planning for AutoCon 2. We will do that back in the US in November again. It's looking like Denver. We're going to probably expand the content even more. And already some very dear friends in this room have asked why you're going to come back to Europe for AutoCon 3. And we're definitely thinking about it. We got to get past Denver first. So that's the background on NAF. Things that we've seen from 2 conferences now. Number 1, community matters. And that might sound very silly to say. And it's a very non-technical issue, but it's a real thing. And for me, there was 2 big observations here. As I left large corporate employers, I spent a long time at Juniper Networks, and Juniper really, formed me as a technical sales leader, and more. But on day 2 of starting my own consulting work, I realized, I'm not part of a bigger team anymore. And so this was like before NAF was even a thing. But I had this realization that, okay, well, I just need to find other ways to build a team and be part of a community. And very serendipitously, NAF has really scratched that itch for me. It's being part of a much bigger group of people with a common goal of trying to do network automation in their own networks. The other surprising thing about the community was, you have the obvious participants, right? People who are running networks who want to do more with automation of operations. That's clear. And then you have the vendors, whether they're the network infrastructure vendors or the software solution providers, the products. But this third leg of the stool, essentially the CodiLimes of the world, professional services and engineering companies that come alongside the customers to help them implement and design automation solutions, and figure out how to use the vendor tools. That's a part of the community that I really didn't expect to be as prominent, but really was impressed upon me very significantly in the Denver event. And so having more support from that community in Amsterdam was no surprise. So, if you have 4 legs of a stool, it'll wobble, right? But 3 legs, it's always even. So we have 3 legs on this stool. So the hunger for help with network automation is really, really high here in Europe as well as in the Americas. I can't even answer questions about doing this in Asia Pac yet. I would love to, but that's another event for another time. We'll see how far that's going in a bit. We're finally seeing coordination of network automation and security type content. Like I dropped the hint of the presentation that was proposed by CodiLime and Palo Alto. Like this is a very important adjacency, right? You're getting telemetry from your network. You're changing things in the network with scripts. Your network firewalls better be highly aligned with what you're doing and other network changes and other pieces of the security puzzle. So I won't steal any thunder from the presentation later tonight. I think you'll see part or all of that tonight. Is that right? So you get to see it here too. I want to see more of that coordination of network with security content, because I think that's important in terms of thinking holistically about your network, right? It's not just, the router and switch configuration. There are other important domains that are adjacent to that we'll talk about later. There are debates that continue, right? Source of truth. Source of truth, do you know what that means? Yes, some do, some do not. Some believe that how could I even have a single source of truth? There's a lot of discussion on this, and how do I track how my network should be configured? There are different vendor tools and different approaches. That's an ongoing conversation. Different models for how I model network elements. That's another discussion. And we had one keynote speaker who basically told us, you all keep talking about waiting for that one well-defined API to do all your automations, and it's never going to happen. So that was a very interesting conversation. When the videos are there, I urge you to go back and take a look and see some of the conversation there. But where we are today, there's still a large focus on writing singular scripts. And that's kind of basic, right? We need to move the ball further down the field on that. We'll talk about that a little bit as we go. Okay. So in terms of basic tech and tools, right, you need Python is the most popular scripting language for creating automations today. There are people that are interested in Go. That's fine. Maybe that will become more popular too. But the top 3 are Python, Python, and Python. Ansible is also really well known for managing device configs and so forth. And of course, having a source of truth is a must-have, even if it's just a spreadsheet. I'm not recommending that you use spreadsheets, to keep all your database of network config stuff, but you need something that says, this is my starting point for the network. If I move into the intermediate phase, these are skills that need to be developed by more and more companies. The cloud ops tools that are very popular for cloud networking and cloud operations. GitHub, infrastructure as code with Terraform, and now OpenTofu. You're aware that Terraform has been acquired by IBM, and boy, this is going to be interesting. They seem to have left Red Hat alone to operate. Let's see if they, do the same with Terraform. But because of other licensing issues not associated with IBM, we've forked out a branch and called Open Tofu now, and you'll see more and more automation vendors talking about support for Open Tofu and less for Terraform. The concept of workflow is also not as well ingrained as I would have thought. So thinking about, how does your process for how you handle trouble tickets and what you do to make changes in a network and how that can drive a set of automations, a set of orchestrated automations, that's really, I'm calling it an intermediate skill because it's not well adopted, I think, by all organizations. There's room to grow there. Some of the commentary that we got post Amsterdam was along the lines of, before COVID, when we were talking about these network automation problems, we were talking about the same problems. And a couple different individuals said, I feel like we're talking about the same problems 5 years later. That's interesting. I don't want to overinterpret that comment, but it does kind of show you there is this slow adoption that's still an issue in the industry. On the advanced front, I have to insert AI into the conversation, right? And is there a lot of hype around AI? Yes, of course. Are there useful bits? Yes, of course. And we'll talk about some details of things you can do with AI tools today that you probably need to start getting familiar with if you're not already. So if I follow from the previous slide on those advanced items and where things should go or can go, here's Scott Robohn's opinion. Are you familiar with that book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People? Ever heard of it? Habit number 2 is start with the end in mind. So if I'm going to start with a big network automation project, and I'm sure CodiLime asks their customers this all the time, they ask my favorite clarifying question: what is the problem you're trying to solve? If you don't ask that question, you can waste a lot of effort. And that's not just a network automation issue, right? That's in any consulting arrangement where you bring somebody, or even internally, where you're trying to address some system-wide issue. As I've suggested this in some smaller meetings, some people have said, well, no, that can be so overwhelming if I think about the end state of automation. It's like, well, it might be, but you might have to get over it and figure out, okay, where do I want to go? That target might shift, but you should at least have an idea of what you want to do. And I'll tell you what I want to do. We'll get there. I think there are 2 big buckets of things we should be moving toward for network automation. One is wholesale orchestration. And unfortunately, I've used the word and the definition of it here. Sorry, scratch orchestration in the parentheses there. But it's the coordination of atomic automations. I might have a script that does a BGP peering pre-check before I make a change. And I might have a script that upgrades a device, or 100 devices, or 500 devices. And then I might have a script that checks things after. Orchestration runs, those tasks in sequence according to a workflow. And again, we're making baby steps where we need to see more and more companies move toward a more mature adoption and chain these atomic automations together. Now, this doesn't just have to be network automations. You can envision situations where I have things that need to be done across the whole IT stack in a coordinated fashion. And if you're familiar with ServiceNow, this is not a vendor endorsement. I don't get paid to talk about any particular products here, but they're one easy way to think about, well, there's somebody who goes to a service catalog for IT and asks for a certain service. And a tool like ServiceNow will go and fire off individual requests to make sure all the pieces that support a service get provisioned. One of the workshops we did last week was an open source version of a workflow orchestrator tool presented by SURF, the Netherlands Research and Education Network, that they've put together with open source tools to basically deliver their network services in their network. It's cool to see what's happening with commercial products, and it's cool to see what people can do with open source. Okay. The other big thing I think we need to see happen is end-to-end closed loop control. Now this sounds big and scary, but we see it in so many other places in tech. And let me just take you through 2 examples to show you how the progression has been made, okay? Telephony, okay? I understood telephony and secure telephony before I could spell IP. It was one of the first things I worked on outside after university, okay? And if you remember, I'll take you a few pictures here. You know, when you first had your networks installed, there was no automatic switching in central offices. Do you call them central offices here in Poland, where all the telephone connections terminate? Yeah, the CO. Okay. Well, it had to be people, and even before it was dominated largely by women, at least in the U.S. I'm not sure this is a worldwide phenomenon. They had boys, you know, young boys running around putting in these connections, and hard to imagine, but the boys were unreliable. They got distracted very easily, and the job ended up being taken over by typically women. So that was the first disruption in the telephone ecosystem. But eventually, we had the invention of the Stowger switch, S-T-O-W-G-E-R, which is the first mechanical switch that allowed those automatic connections of lines and actually displaced, the telephone operator role. Didn't happen all overnight. It took decades. And then the mechanical switch evolved into electronic switch, right? And both the mechanical switches and the electronic switches can take up rows and rows and rows in a CO in large central offices. Okay. But wait, it gets better. Eventually, I figured out I don't need a separate voice network anymore. I can just treat voice like an application on my data network. Voice over IP allowed us to do that, right? So I got even more fungibility in terms of using software to instantiate and create new services for voice that I wouldn't have been able to if I were still plugging, RCA jacks into connections in my central office. So, not to mention, this isn't necessarily an automation thing, but the enablement of many, many different vocoders, right? And vocoders are the algorithms that take analog voice and digitize it and turn it into a bit stream of a certain rate. And if you know the basics, right? A 64 kilobit per second voice stream is an uncompressed, digitized stream for human voice, by the way, not for CD quality or high quality sound. We found so many ways to shrink that bit stream down as just another piece of innovation in telephony. Not an automation thing. I'm just a telephone nerd. I had to say that. So, okay. Makes sense? That was a century, right? I just covered a century of telephony for you. What about routing? Much less than a century. Who are good router jocks in here? Okay. Well, there's been an evolution here too. Okay. And we started out first with these things called static routes that are just like they sound. Oh, to get to this IP network, I have to go out this physical interface. What happens if that physical interface goes down? Can't reach the route anymore. Right? So I needed more flexibility and dynamism to accommodate failures in the network. So I created something called floating static routes, where to get to a given network, I had a more flexible way of going out interface X or interface Y or interface Z. I like saying Z for all my non-US English-speaking friends. So, but still pretty clunky, not very dynamic. We wanted to invent routing protocols, right? So one of the first popular routing protocols was RIP. It's a really hard decode, the Routing Information Protocol. Now, it was a huge improvement over any of the static routing variants, but it was still pretty slow, and I could lose reaching a network for minutes at a time, depending on what kinds of failures happen in the network. So I still needed a better way to keep the network topology information up to date. So Cisco invented a couple of different routing protocols called IGRP and EIGRP. They did a better job of handling different types of failures in the network. So not just failures, but where's capacity getting eaten up or where are bit rates higher. They came up with this idea of a composite routing metric that tried to take in, I think, 5 different things and route traffic accordingly. It was interesting, but it didn't really solve the problem. They were better than RIP from a convergence time perspective. What really changed the game was this idea called link state routing, which is just like it sounds. I flood the status of a link within a piece of the network, and that can happen in tens of milliseconds within a given area. So I go from losing a route for minutes to 60 seconds to 30 seconds to now within less than a second, I can have up-to-date information of what's happening from a routing perspective, right? And that's the kind of stuff that enabled voice over IP, right? Because you can only lose so many packets if you want to run voice over that network and so forth. The point here in whether my telephony example or this routing example is we kept building automatic mechanisms into protocols. Why aren't we thinking the same way with automation? Like, why do we want to, okay, now fire off this script, and now fire off this script, and now fire off this script, and keep a human in the click OK to continue loop, right? You really want to get the human out of that, right? That's something I think we need to get some innovation in this area, not just in vendor products, but in thought amongst people who are operating the network to get people out of the way so much. There are different things you need to do. It takes time to build trust in tools. The tools need to be engineered well, right? What is the problem you're trying to solve? Make sure you ask that question first. But I think we want that same vector of protocol automatic operation in network automation. I think that's a goal we should push for. Reducing the need for human intervention, right, keeps those real-time services up. We skipped over it a little bit here, but when human jobs are impacted, that's a real factor. It needs to be considered, right? That's not an easy question to answer, but from a technology perspective, part of our job is dealing with disruption, right? We get new tech and new tools thrown at us every year. And so if you're uncomfortable with technological disruption, this might not be the career field for you. I say that as gently as I possibly can, right? Because if you're not willing to upskill and learn new ways of doing things, someone else will come along behind you and will be willing to do it. So keep your skills fresh. Always keep growing, whether it's automation or what have you. This is one of my favorite recent quotes on this whole topic. Do you know Greg Farrow from Packet Pushers? Packet Pushers is a really interesting podcast network. They do a lot of IT, including networking, security, cloud podcasts. And Greg's been doing this for, I think, 15 years. And he tends to have a pretty good read on how real certain technology trends are. And I'd say he's still pretty skeptical about AI in particular. But one of the benefits he sees is, he's not worried about AI replacing human work. He sees the advantage of getting machine work out of the hands of humans so we can do more interesting things. I like the way he put it, and I gratuitously ripped that off from Twitter earlier today. Hi. So how does that translate into key tech and key tools for us in network automation? Well, we are seeing the evolution of orchestration platforms, and we'll continue to see them. I've dropped a couple names there. There's room for more too. It'll be really interesting to see how this part of the industry evolves. It can be, again, homegrown. There are ways you can do this yourselves with scripting and logic and timing and so forth. But there's a growing class of tools and platforms that makes this much more accessible to people and uses embedded AI for low code, right? So for those of us in this room that have coding skills, you should be aware that ChatGPT and other chat tools can be really useful for getting the mundane bits of coding done. Like, it's not going to completely replace us tomorrow, but you should be able to leverage ChatGPT for the basic stuff that you don't have to do over and over again. Everybody knows Iron Man, right? Tony Stark, right? Tony Stark is still in control within the Iron Man suit. He's still the human in control, but now he's got superpowers because of his suit. Your automations can give you superpowers and you still be in control. That's one good way to think of it. Telemetry and observability tools play a huge role here. And I got lazy and I didn't have time to put together a good slide that shows end-to-end control. But I think many of you can envision, what that looks like. You experience it every day when you make a phone call, right? There's signaling that happens when you make a call that makes sure there's bandwidth available to make a connection. It goes all the way to one end, it comes back and says, yep, we're good to create a connection here, right? MPLS with RSVP does the same thing, right? It sends out a path message all the way down to the place where you want an MPLS LSP to terminate, and it sends back confirmations all along the path, right? We do it with OSPF hellos, we do it with BGP keep lives, all sorts of things here. The evolution of AI in network engineering in particular. Have you tried it for any of these things? Have you ever tried to throw packet captures? You'd be surprised. The results get better every week. I hear more and more people doing this. You can get good 80%, 90% config generation. Still needs human supervision, right? Don't just take the output and paste. That's another way to let somebody else do your job really quickly because you'll get fired. You can feed it information on getting its arms around the topology of a network. You can even use the Dolly tool to draw pictures of your network today. And it's getting embedded in other tools, turning up as in terms of features in existing products versus new AI products, right? You're going to see a whole class of different large language models come into different tools and improve the features and the capabilities of those tools. This isn't necessarily tomorrow. This is today as well. But the idea here is your brains are all limited. I mean, no disrespect to any of you. My brain is limited, right? But now when I put my Tony Stark Iron Man suit on, I now have additional capability. I can get beyond my cognitive load limits. Okay. Important adjacencies that I called out. I think security is a really important one. I want more security content at AutoCon conferences. Adam, I'm not looking at you directly. Optical. We've been trying to coordinate IP and optical networking for decades, for as long as I've been in this business. there are things happening with hardware, and in particular ZR optics. It's this new class of optics that can drive optical signals much, much farther from a QSFP plugged into a router or a switch or a firewall. And it puts much more control into the router, switch, and firewall hands and takes more control away from optical network infrastructure. So we're going to see this have an impact and become an opportunity for better automation here. And multi-cloud networking, I think, is another area that is really important to keep an eye on. As we want the flexibility to move cloud workloads around and the cloud providers get closer to parity, I need virtual plumbing that will let me put workloads in Azure today, AWS tomorrow, Google Cloud the next day, and so forth. So what about NAF? What are we doing about all this? Right? This past week in Amsterdam, we did our first workshops that were deeper dives on certain topics like workflow orchestration, like the basics of GitHub and Ansible and Python. We're going to double the number of workshops in Denver, right? So we'll have 2 tracks of 2-day workshops. We're really looking forward to that. We're starting to participate in meetups like this. So like when CodiLime asked if I was interested in doing this, heck yes. We're trying to do the same thing in the US, and we're working with an organization called the US Networking User Association that does a really good job of local automation meetups. I mean, I believe they have it in the UK as well. So if that's something that CodiLime's interested in doing on a bigger scale, I can probably help connect you with some people who've done this. So things that we're actively thinking about. These are not commitments. I repeat, these are not commitments, but we're really, really interested in trying to do the following. Come up with a learning track for automation skills, training and certification. What would it look like to have a NAF 1.0 automation associate? I've just made that name up. I'm not in marketing. It's obvious why I'm not in marketing. I'm really bad at making up names. But we're thinking about working with other industry leaders to try and define what a learning path would look like and maybe offer certification testing at NAF events. That's something that could be really interesting. As part of our workshop plan, there's been some big asks for hackathons, which can be a super fun learning activity. So we're trying to see, can we work one of those into our Denver event this year? Doing industry research. We're exposed to a lot of what's happening, with vendors and in customer networks. We're trying to figure out, are there ways that we can put out content that can be much more formally helpful that we would also like to monetize. We love what we're doing. We also have to feed our families. 2025 and beyond, would we love to come back to Europe somewhere? Absolutely. Stay tuned. It probably won't be Amsterdam, just because we'd like to find a lower cost location. I'm open to suggestions. Sorry? Warsaw, there we go. I'm again, let's talk about it for sure. Okay. So if you want to be part of the conversation, this QR code will get you to the NAF Slack channel. It's completely open. We hide your email addresses so vendors can't come in and harvest your email addresses. And there's some great dialogue and great conversations happening here. So please, you don't have to attend an event. You don't have to promise to attend an event. You can participate in this right now. So feel free to join. And tell us what's important to you, right? We can talk about that a little bit. I know I'm going a little long here. So I have other side projects that I'm working on that are automation adjacent. I'm gonna cut that short here because I want to make sure we have enough time for the rest. As an aside, I am looking holistically at what's happening with our operation stacks today, and I did a really fun podcast on that with packet pushers If you go to that QR code, that'll get you that link to the podcast. You can listen to it and tell me how crazy I am. Okay. Had to work a Matrix meme in here somewhere. Chris and I feel at NAF like we're just getting started. We've got 2 events under our belt now. We have all sorts of ideas to implement for the next. And again, we'd love to have as many of you come as are able or participate remotely. That's me on LinkedIn. Feel free to connect. That's a lot of QR codes in one presentation. I'm sorry about that. And I can take a couple questions in the back. So the question is, how do we intend to fund our research? So there could be sponsored reports. There could be reports that maybe people pay for an early view 90 days ahead, and then they become public. We're working through models of how that would look like. Some of them might be sponsored reports by end consumers, instead of being sponsored by vendors. Work in progress. What else?
The orchestration, how does it look like from the standardization of the vocabulary? Because I know there were heated discussion on this, and where are we there?
So that's an excellent question. It's hard for us to drive common nomenclature across the whole industry, but we have basically our own lexicon called the Autonomicon that we're keeping, in NAF. We keep it up on GitHub. And that's kind of our baseline for how we use certain terminology. So that's how we're trying to at least have common concepts and terms defined amongst NAF.
Okay. What do you think about application-centric automation? Because what you presented is more on the network level, but at top there are services and applications.
Yep.
So the awareness of what we need to serve for is very important for end-to-end, right?
Yeah.
So could you please elaborate a little bit?
Well, you know what question I'm going to ask you.
About the problem I want to solve.
Exactly. So can you give me a specific example? Like is there a specific application that needs that tight coupling with network automation? And if you can think of it now, you could come back to me later.
Yeah, let's talk about it offline maybe.
Yeah. And to give you a general answer, I think in general, we don't want the network to change as quickly as some applications do. Like there are applications where if I have a DevOps model, I could be rolling out changes every month, every week, a couple times a week, right, to client software, right? And I don't think we want that much churn in the network. So you want the network infrastructure to be stable, but be able to accommodate whatever those application requirements are.
Yeah, but if you take into account different flows for different applications, the network behavior may be, expectation for the network behavior may be different, right?
Agreed. And so there's one general trend, like when I went through the routing discussion, where we've moved from very unresponsive routing changes to now very responsive, where I can now throw voice traffic on my network. The network infrastructure has become more responsive to changes, within tens of milliseconds that allow those applications. If you have applications that have even tighter requirements for things like that, they definitely need to go into the network design. I think high frequency trading is probably one of the best examples, right? Where big financial houses that rely on extremely fast responses to trading, design their networks very specifically to do things like that. It is totally possible. Again, it's an important exercise in figuring out, okay, what are the real requirements and how does that drive down into the network layer?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you.
Thank you very much.